Hey fruit lovers! Welcome to another exciting episode of Plant Life 850. Today we're going to do something a little different. As we all know by now, there's a coronavirus pandemic among us, and I know many of you are concerned about our food supply. One of the major problems with our food supply is that we rely on farmers thousands of miles away from where we call home for almost every single thing we eat. We jumped off that victory garden movement from the 50s and became content with convenience stores, fast food, and no skills required meals. Until recently, a good amount of us first worlders didn't even have to care about the nutritional content of our food, as we have our handy-dandy healthcare system to fall back on. How privileged are we to eat because we want to, while other countries have to? Just think about that for a second. I know there are a lot of food is free projects out there, but you still need some type of capital and business model to produce food to the masses, as most people just want to go to the grocery store, buy a cart full of groceries, and not have to return for weeks if they didn't feel like it. Farmers markets are great, but that's more for social hour. My goal today is to start putting out my intentions for real. I intend to create a successful market garden with a CSA, to have faithful and loyal members of the community support what I do, but also inspire people to grow a little something for themselves to help relieve stress on the current food system. Overall, I want to revamp the state and put in place a network of farmers all over Florida that will work together to feed Floridians. Honestly, I'm quite appalled we get oranges from California because I thought that was supposed to be our job. Not only do I want to help our industrial farmers, but also create a network that extends to the small-scale farmers that meet the weekly needs of their own communities. I'm calling my campaign Regenerate the State, so farmers within the state of Florida can grow together, both in monetary and community value. Of course, this idea isn't exclusive to Florida, and I hope to inspire new and current market gardeners to really make an impact on our food resources. Our current food system is 100% reliable on fossil fuels. If we no longer have access to oil, then we no longer have food. I want my county, and even my country, to have enough farmers growing food within 50 miles of where the food will be consumed. We really only need 10% of the population to produce food and we'd be set. Ideally, farmers would follow permaculture principles to ensure the most production per acre, but also regenerate the land and ecosystem that we originally destroyed when clearing out the land in the first place. But permaculture is a whole subject on its own, and we shall dig deeper into this topic in another video. Regenerating the state starts with the state of our current communities. I want to scale down to what you can personally do to ease the burden on your state by becoming as self-sufficient as you're comfortable doing. Let's start with talking about what it means to be self-sufficient and why you should care. Being self-sufficient doesn't mean living completely off-grid, away from everyone, but you can dream. Typically, self-sufficiency is the ability to supply one's own needs without external assistance. This could include being confident in your own resources. This will look different for everyone, like someone living on a large homestead versus someone living in an apartment. Some might think this goes along with the prepper community, and they would be right. There's things each of us can do every day to increase our independence from society. Growing food is a great physical and mental therapy. You'll get exercise, lots of sunshine, and tons of vegetables as time goes on. All these things will help reduce stress and depression, which in turn creates happy people, which means happy communities. First, you want to determine what is important to you. The main categories I've come up with are pretty basic, but cover everything you would need for your self-sufficient lifestyle. The main category I'll talk about is food, which includes growing and foraging for food, but also saving and storing the excess. Water, electricity, transportation, education, and networking are the other categories I've deemed important. I have a little bubble for materials, but you need materials for almost all these categories anyways. So a good rule of thumb is trying to obtain materials in the most economical way possible to help keep your carbon footprint small. Water is the most important resource you need, as you cannot live for more than 3 days without it. If you are hooked up to city water, then saving and storing water isn't an immediate need, but definitely something you want to work on over time. Most suburban homes are set up with gutters, so it would be really easy to collect rainwater. For those that don't, gutters are pretty cheap. I lived in a townhome 7 years ago as a rental and just lined the edges of the porch with buckets, so when it rained, the buckets got filled. I didn't have gutters, but I found a way to be able to save rainwater without much effort. Storing rainwater is great for the garden and as a backup if the city water were to become contaminated or inaccessible. For drinking, you'll want to invest in some type of filter system like the Berkey or Life Water, which both work great filtering rainwater if you have a shingle roof or really any water that you might question. You could even get more eco-friendly with it and learn how to filter water with natural materials like sand and charcoal and some other things. But once you learn that skill, you could easily live out in the woods or be stranded on a deserted island and still have access to drinkable water. Moving on, we've got electricity. This one is pretty simple. Get you some solar panels and batteries, figure out how much solar energy you want to store/use, and then find you some instructions on the web on how you can harness the solar energy for your daily needs. If you find that you use a lot of energy, especially at night, you'll have to consider the space you'll need for all those batteries, along with how often you would have to replace those batteries, as most do not last more than a few years. This isn't the most eco-friendly option, but I'm sure there's some battery technology NASA has that they are hoarding for themselves. There are things like a human hamster wheel that I've seen, or even bicycles for your home that you can use to charge up your batteries as well. If you and some of your neighbors got together, you could get a wind turbine installed and share it. If you're lucky enough to have some river flow, you can install water generators for hydropower. Next category, we have transportation. We all know fossil fuels are unsustainable. If you have to have a car, try buying used and buying one that is electric or hybrid at least. The car making process is unsustainable, but buying used helps keep cars out of the junkyard. There are ways to convert cars to use ethanol or even to electric cars. I've seen some things on the web about cars being powered by water, so maybe that's a viable option for you. Mark Shepard has an oil cartel, as people have referred to it that way. Him and his buddies use about 10% of their land for oil crops. They all put money into purchasing this oil making machine, and one of their buddies runs it as his business. He presses the oil, sells to restaurants that use the oil for food, and then the guy collects it back. He presses the oil, sells to restaurants that use the oil for cooking. Then the guy collects the oil, cleans it, and eventually the oil goes back into the hands of the farmers that grew it. Then they use that oil for their cars and other machinery that's capable of doing so. This is what you would call a closed loop system. And these products stay local, which is something I support and promote. I added networking on here as a way to be self-sufficient because we are a social species. We would not have gotten this far if it wasn't for our strength in numbers. I might be really good at growing food, but sometimes I might need help with my car or some household repairs. Having a plumber, mechanic, construction, or other contract workers in your network will give you more confidence in the choices you make for your life. Instead of having to pay someone thousands of dollars to fix the roof, I could essentially barter their labor for my labor. I could give them food weekly, which adds to their food security, or even offer to install food plants at their home in exchange for their services. I have friends who do hair, I have friends that do daycare, friends that do landscaping, Some work on cars, some make music, sell houses, all kinds of professions. If the system failed, I'm confident these people will look out for me if I'm looking out for them. Even if you don't need their services, having a broad range of friends is enjoyable and there's always something to learn. Education is important when it comes to being self-sufficient. You can't just decide one day to be off-grid and expect things to fall into place. You gotta work towards it, and there's a lot of information out there on how to do so. YouTube University is a great resource for the general population to learn how others are doing what you want to do in almost any scenario, whether you are living in an apartment, house, or motor vehicle. There are also tons of books you can get on any subject. In case the internet fails us, I've got a library of physical books dedicated to plants. I have propagation books, companion planting, several about permaculture, foraging and identifying wild foods, books on mushrooms, and things of that sort. In the future, I'll be purchasing more plant-related books, along with stuff about earthworks and other self-sustaining practices. I like being able to lend these books out to friends as well. Another way to gain knowledge would be to connect with others around you that have what you are looking for. You can read all the books you want, but real life experience matters too. I did put housing on my list of important things you'll need to be self-sufficient, but someone might be living in a van while others live on a farm or in the middle of a city. Having a roof over your head is pretty basic common sense in terms of safety and self-sufficiency. But you could easily live off the land and live in a van that travels, with the right knowledge, of course. I think one reason why we have so much anxiety and depression in our communities is due to a lack of knowledge. Most of us in the first world don't really have to think about running out of food, water, or having a roof over our head because our parents gave us a pretty good start. We're almost oblivious to how the rest of the world manages, and they barely have running water. If my friends knew all about the cool food plants we could go forage for, we'd probably be out there harvesting some instead of being inside our houses wishing the beach was open. Having the knowledge of plants and land gives me the confidence I want every time I leave my house. I know where everything is in my town, but I have yet to go and forage for things. I do get anxiety thinking about walking around the neighborhood or even thinking about walking along the river, mostly because I don't like bugs, and I also don't know which snakes are poisonous around here. But if I just took a minute to research snakes in my area and what to do when I encounter them, I will be less afraid and anxious to venture out into my town to explore the land. Foraging is a great way to learn about the land around you, along with getting free food. There are tons of wild foods within your reach, but most people consider them a weed. Dandelions are a great example. They are high in vitamins and can be eaten cooked or raw. You can certainly find them almost anywhere, and almost everyone knows what a dandelion is. Imagine knowing 100 different plants within 2 miles of you that are edible and medicinal. There's an app I use called Picture This to help me identify plants. There's also plant identifying groups available on social media. Growing food is my favorite topic. It's also one of the most important skills you can develop as a human being. Our topsoil is constantly being depleted. Without human intervention, Mother Nature needs at least 100 years to make 1 inch of topsoil. Most of our food crops grow in the first 12 inches of topsoil. We can speed up this process by adding organic matter to our land every season. This would include things like animal manure and green manure, which is from plants. I'll have another episode on growing food and building soil specifically, so let's get down to the basics of growing food. First, you'll want to think about what to grow. For me, I'm thinking more long-term, so I've been buying perennial/permaculture type of plants, meaning low-maintenance plants with multiple uses, usually, that you don't really have to do anything to once they are established. Fruit trees are a great example. Sure, you might want to protect your little tree from the hot sun in the middle of the day while the plant gets established, but after a year, you really don't want to do anything to it. If you have to baby it, it will probably end up dying once you stop tending to it. In the permaculture world, we look for species and varieties of plants that do well within the climate we're growing in. Ideally, these are plants you want to put in and be able to walk away from. Getting a little off topic here. So to grow food, you start by thinking of things you want to eat, but also what works for your area. I do live in Northwest Florida, where we are in the central time zone, and I plan for a humid zone 8B type of climate. You could potentially grow tropical fruits such as mangoes and avocados, but also stone fruit like peaches, pears, and persimmons. Once you've established what type of climate zone you're in, you can start buying seeds and plants. Annuals are always trial and error, but with hundreds of different tomato varieties out there, there's bound to be quite a few that you'll favor over others. Once you've got the plants, you just need to decide where to put them. Sunlight is important, and each plant has a unique set of light requirements. Everything grows in the understory though, so don't think you can't grow anything underneath that big oak tree because all the fruits and veggies will thrive. There's so much information on the web on how to get started, what soil amendments people are using, what type of plants to grow, and where, and anything you could possibly think you'll need to know about plants. I have learned quite a bit from YouTube myself, and I'll list a few of those people below that I would consider my mentors. Lately, I've been watching channels that are Florida specific along with Australia because I want to gain more knowledge of what types of plants people are growing, how well they're doing, and how long I can expect to harvest food from that plant. There are so many benefits to growing your own food, including higher nutrition content, reduces intake of chemicals and pesticides, and you also get to eat things you never would have come across in your big box store. There are lots of moving parts to this campaign, but we'll take it one day at a time together. Let's build the community of our dreams, not just for ourselves and our kids, but also for future America. I want to give power back to the people. I want us to care if our neighbor is happy. I want you to have access to the most nutrient-dense food available. I want us to get back to basics, connecting with the land and food as our ancestors used to. Before we started using agriculture practices 10,000 years ago, we were nomads with the knowledge of over 10,000 plants. That knowledge stopped being taught when we stopped going into the woods. We are still losing knowledges of plants and other primitive skills that would really benefit us as a society now. I'm optimistic that this is the lifestyle we're looking for. One that we can be at peace when our kids run down the street without fear of them being kidnapped. Or a society that puts people first instead of capital. One that doesn't have hospital beds full of sick patients or jails filled with people. I want to inspire people to invest in the love economy and the gift economy. I want to live in a society that I know all my friends love their jobs, love their bosses and coworkers, but also love the work they do because of how fulfilling the tasks are. Helping others creates joy and builds up self-esteem. I honestly don't see any downside to having true local food systems set up within our communities. We already have distribution centers set up. We just have to use our resources, create associations, and unions to ensure fair trade agreements. We are all human beings living together on this tiny ball flying through the universe, and our time is limited. Why not create a lifestyle where you can work less, get paid more, but also have the opportunity to give back to your community, whether it be volunteering or donating excess food you grow in your own backyard? Long term, I love the idea of my friends and I working together growing food, never having to leave town to get what we need. There's a quote by Bill Mollison, the father of permaculture, that I'd like to share with you to close out this narrative. This quote encompasses everything I'm working towards in one breath. He says, "We're only truly secure when we can look out our kitchen window and see our food growing and our friends working nearby." Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Plant Life 850. Until next time, support your local farmers and eat your vegetables.